The original Young Avengers series was a favorite of mine. It created a lot of awesome new characters, all cleverly tied into established Marvel lore in a way that helped bring new readers into the universe while giving older readers something to be engaged by. The circumstances of the Avengers drifting apart were much different in the comics, but after Endgame I thought it felt like the obvious and perfect time to bring the Young Avengers into the MCU. And all signs were pointing to the heads of Marvel Studios agreeing with me. They'd already introduced the young girl who would become Stature with the very likable Cassie Lang all the way back in Ant-Man. And in Endgame, when she reappeared as a teenager, it seemed like they were taking advantage of the 5-year jump to age her up so they could position her exactly where they'd need to get her onto the team. Very soon after, we got Wandavision that introduced Billy and Tommy as Wanda's magically created children during her mental breakdown. A speedrun version of what happened to them in comics, and at the end of the series, they were both wiped from existence, bringing us again exactly where we needed to be to reintroduce them similarly to how they'd been introduced in the Young Avengers comics. Then, Falcon and the Winter Soldier had Sam Wilson visit Isaiah Bradley and his grandson Eli, who in comics goes on to become Patriot due to his connection to his grandfather. Hawkeye then brought in Kate Bishop as a main character. Though she was older than the others and her comic counterpart was at the time, she still felt young enough that she could fit in with the team when it debuted. And as far as Hulkling, Skrulls had been introduced already. It would be very simple to bring him in at any time. Maybe leave him as a character to introduce in Young Avengers itself even. And when I realized that the MCU was planning to build up Kang the Conqueror as its next big threat, I was even more sure that they were setting up Young Avengers. In the comics, it was at a time when the Avengers had been disassembled. The mysterious Iron Lad appears and puts together the Young Avengers to stand against the coming threat of Kang. The young heroes quite hopelessly face off against Kang and learn Iron Lad's true identity. He is Kang from earlier in Kang's timeline, when he was a kid and before his fate had been set towards evil. Iron Lad had traveled back in time and formed the team to face against an evil version of himself and try to stop himself from ever having to become the megalomaniacal time tyrant. The team is unable to defeat Kang without destroying the timeline, and Iron Lad realizes he must sacrifice his own future and accept becoming Kang, or time itself will be destroyed. It's a heroic sacrifice, and it would add so much tragedy to the MCU's next big threat. The Young Avengers would be set as major players in the next big crossover, and our heroes would have a personal connection to Kang, like Gamora did to Thanos in Infinity War. The Avengers of the MCU were basically disassembled. They were setting up Kang as the next big threat, and they'd introduced all but 2 of the original Young Avengers group within 2 years of Endgame. There was no doubt in my mind that they were immediately going to do this. The MCU had been going 10 years. A lot of fans had enjoyed the ride and were ready to bow out. And a lot of younger audiences were going to start seeing the MCU as dad movies. The Young Avengers comic had brought in a lot of new readers in a way that made them respect and be interested in the convoluted continuity of the Marvel Universe. A good movie version could do the same for the MCU and inject the theaters with a new audience to keep the MCU huge without damaging the existing characters and lore, only enhancing them. A story at the side of the universe that would weave into a greater story they were building, the same way Guardians of the Galaxy had weaved into Infinity War. I was awaiting an official announcement for this all to come together in Young Avengers any day now. But as you know, that day never came. Where the hell is Young Avengers? They dropped seeds in everywhere that comic fans would follow and pick up on. And did what with them? And now it's been 3 years since Kate Bishop was introduced, and we still don't have a Young Avengers movie? Now, 3 years may not seem like that much time, but it frickin' is. The distance from Iron Man to Avengers was just 4 years. Avengers to Age of Ultron was 3. And from Ultron to Infinity War was just 3 again. There's a reason they get these things out so fast. Uber nerds like me, and assumedly you, will follow and remember all this convoluted crap. Other more casual viewers will not be as patient. And if you don't do these things in a fun and timely manner, they'll forget too much and just lose interest. In those 3 years, all they've done is just keep introducing more young heroes like Ms. Marvel, America Chavez, or Ironheart. So what the hell happened? Everything was perfectly set up and they did nothing with it? How did they botch such an easy win so badly? Well, I have a theory. I think that somewhere behind the scenes they made a really bad idea, and I think it's basically in line with what I assumed they were setting up for earlier. Kang. They'd use Kang in Loki. They were going to use him in Ant-Man. It seemed like they were planning to use him in multiple projects as different time variants of himself, and they'd all build to Avengers, the Kang Dynasty. I think they were planning to use a version of Iron Lad in a Young Avengers project, but they wanted to wait until after the full Kang had been introduced in Quantumania. I think they were expecting audiences to be blown away by Jonathan Majors' epic performance as the character and take his build-up with as much excitement as they had Thanos. Then when Iron Lad appeared in Young Avengers and was revealed to be another Kang, audiences would have their minds blown. But I think they thought that mind-blowing twist would only work if audiences knew who the hell Kang is, so they waited. And then not only were audiences not particularly electrified by Kang, most people hadn't even seen him. Ant-Man was a box office disappointment for Marvel, so I think they began rethinking things behind the scenes. And when Jonathan Majors has his, controversies, they just outright scrapped the whole thing. Now, we can never know for sure, but I think it had to be some variation of this. And if so, I think it was a real mistake. They think people need to know who Kang is to appreciate Young Avengers? Well, I can tell you who didn't know who the hell Kang was and still appreciated Young Avengers. Every single Young Avengers fan who got into the comics through that series. Stories like that are a great way to get casual readers who are interested engaged with the greater universe that they don't know all the little details of. You don't need to know who Kang is to appreciate the threat he poses and Iron Lad's tragic sacrifice. You don't need to know much about Scarlet Witch to empathize with Wiccan and Speed's journey of finding each other and longing for their lost mother. You don't even need to know who the hell Captain America is to understand Patriot's struggle to do whatever it takes to be special like his grandfather. And you don't need to know one thing about Skrulls or the Hulk to think Hulkling looks cool and be engaged in his relationship with his teammate Wiccan. The details of this world and continuity just aren't important to whether or not you like and feel for the characters. And now it's just too late to do that Young Avengers origin story. And it seems Marvel's pivoting to a new idea. It sounds like we're no longer getting a Young Avengers film. It's going to be a streaming series, and it's not going to be called Young Avengers anymore. They're going to call it The Champions. Champions is a totally different group with its own totally different lore and vibe, but I suppose it'd be stupid to call a team Young Avengers now that Kate Bishop is fucking 30. We've seen Ms. Marvel awkwardly recruit Kate onto a team at the end of the Marvels. We've seen an older Wiccan and Agatha all along. We've seen a recasted Cassie in Quantumania, so we can get a sense for what it is that they're building. But is there a point anymore? Will anyone watch this? Can these characters together achieve popularity with a totally original story? I'd assume the most well-known character would be Cassie Lang. The character's been in 3 Ant-Man films and is a huge part of Ant-Man's character, and he's quite popular. Most people, I think, will at least know her as Ant-Man's daughter, if you said that. Second would likely be Kate Bishop. She starred in her own show with Clint Barton, so there should have been a few eyeballs there. Third, maybe Wiccan and Speed. They are featured heavily in WandaVision, but I imagine most people know them as those weird kids from Multiverse of Madness. Billy was featured in Agatha all along, but I wonder how big the crossover audience would even be between this show about a bunch of witches and a show about a bunch of kids fighting crime. I would guess next would be Ironheart, maybe? She may have had the worst, most ham-fisted, and awkward introduction of any character in the MCU so far, but a lot of people saw Black Panther 2 to respect Chadwick Boseman's tragic passing. Maybe they'll remember that Iron Man girl, but maybe not that fondly or well. And she has that series coming soon that I expect will not really win her a lot more followers. Ms. Marvel, I guess, would be after. Not many people actually watched the show or the movie she was in, but it was advertised to hell, and I think people may half recognize her. She's also been featured in that shitty Avengers game in Ultimate Alliance 3, so maybe that'll help. And then maybe people will well remember America Chavez. She had a huge role in Multiverse of Madness, but at the same time, she was very, very unmemorable. She was basically just a MacGuffin in a movie already overstuffed with cameos and characters. If they'd given her the character and attitude of the comics, I think people would have remembered her a lot more. But then I do kind of think they were originally planning to merge Hulkling and Scar together into one character for their original Young Avengers plan, which would have been fucking god-awful. But they introduced that horrible, stupid thing at the end of She-Hulk and called it Hulk's son. I forgot about him completely, actually, until right now. He's the actual worst character introduction of the MCU, not Ironheart. Hey gang, it's my son you've never seen before. Oh dear God, hopefully they'll just retcon that shit and do a proper Scar design and intro one day. How many people even watch She-Hulk to the end? Will anyone ever even notice? And then there's no way in hell anyone remembers Patriot. He had like 3 scenes in a streaming show and he wasn't even the focus. I just referenced him earlier and I'm gonna guess you already forgot who he was. Alright, so here's our tentative list for champions. Now if you click this video, you're likely the person who remembers at least a few of these characters. But how well does your average viewer remember them? We already saw from the Marvels how basing your cast around obscure streaming show characters the vast majority of people don't know doesn't really lead to massive success in these things. And some of these characters are about as obscure as you can get. So our champions team is potentially Ant-Man's recasted daughter, Hawkeye, but not that Hawkeye, those kids from Doctor Strange also recasted, that Iron Man Rip-Off girl, that girl from that show and that movie, that Star Portal girl, And wait, Hulk has a son? Does that roster sound like something to base a big budget project around? I know there are people like me who are following all these breadcrumbs, but how many weirdos like us are out there? But why do I even care if it bombs or not, right? Why not just wait and see how it is before I complain? Well, it's simple. Every project they fund and developed is another project that they did not fund and develop. I want two things for the MCU. I want it to be good, and I want them to make money off good things so they'll keep making more good things. I don't think Champions will be able to do either because I think the foundation is broken. It was originally a Young Avengers project, and it's been completely retooled in some kind of horrible Frankenstein of what the original idea likely was. So if they can't get their shit together, I think they'd be better off just writing this one off as a bust and focusing their attentions on something new that could actually be a hit. Because though I think Young Avengers could have been a hit, I think Champions will just be okay. If we're lucky. Now, I could probably go on about this for another 2 hours, but I'm going to cut it there. Am I wrong? Will Champions be able to rescue these young heroes and pop culture? Any of the potential cast you're excited to see? Any you wish you never had to see again? Hulkson. Is there a future for these characters in a future Avengers film? And most importantly, will they try to bring in Iron Lad and just make him a young time-traveling Dr. Doom and confuse the hell out of everyone? Now, just like the MCU, I'm going to tease my next video as being something related to this topic, but then completely change my plans and give you something totally different. So click that subscribe and notification button to see my next video, which will 100% be a deep dive into why Iron Lad will be Dr. Doom and how he's the key to Secret Wars. Then be disappointed when it's actually about something else. See you soon!